Okay, thanks everyone for joining us today for this fabulous webinar with the author of Hedging Wisely and our CEO at Wise Trading Tech, Rohanna Wise. We appreciate you making the time to be with us today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Rohanna in a second. I am Shereen Shermack. I lead the marketing efforts at Wise Trading Tech, and I will be your host. And our guest today is Rohanna Wise, CEO of Wise Risk. Her background is deep in the financial services space, having had 20 years of experience at firms like Acadian, SS&C, and Wellington, working in all types of financial technologies, but with a real focus on FX and currency hedging. And she is also, as I mentioned, the recent author of a book entitled Hedging Wisely, which is what we're going to focus on today. So welcome, Rohanna.
Thank you, Shereen.
So I'm just going to show folks the cover of your book, Hedging Wisely. They can go out to Amazon and purchase a copy if they're interested after the webinar. But the idea of Hedging Wisely was to help investors who are participating in the global markets, because when they do that, they take on exposure to currency markets. So with that, I'd kind of like to jump into our questions for today and talk about what motivated you to write Hedging Wisely.
Sure. I mean, what motivated me actually was someone asked me, but I hadn't really considered it before that. But I guess more the answer is the reason I did it is because I really had gotten out and about a lot in the space of currency and going to a lot of conferences and talking to a lot of people and just seeing that there were so many asset managers, you know, a little bit more sometimes in smaller places than the larger places where I had been working, where they really did not have any currency knowledge or expertise and did not know how to go about putting on a hedge strategy to protect their clients from the investment activity they were engaged in. So typically, you know, they're trading international equities or something, and they're at this conference or wherever I happen to be meeting them because they're just trying to figure out how to hedge. And the thing about hedging is that, you know, this is obviously led me to build a software to help this same problem. But the thing about a currency hedging strategy is that it is pretty complicated. It does take a pretty significant subject matter expertise to really do right without a really good tool. And so I think the idea of writing the book was kind of, hey, these are the instruments you can use, just a really basic 101 on what is currency exposure, what's causing it, how can you hedge it, why is it difficult to hedge, you know, what's cheap, what's expensive, and just a little bit of a how-to one-on-one to help those kinds of people. So it's pretty, you know, for asset managers.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like it was a good idea given the number of requests I know you get for help. Help us understand a little bit about the market structure and why the tension between the buy side and the sell side actually plays out in this space. Are their interests ever aligned in currency hedging?
Right, sure. I will say that a lot of those people, that same audience of people I'm talking about that I sort of targeted the book to, a lot of them, because they don't know how to implement a currency hedging strategy, what they're doing is they're just having it done for them. So either they're outsourcing that exposure management service altogether and paying quite an expensive fee, and also just giving all of their currency flow to that provider, who is typically a big bank, or they're just having their custodian do it, and they really have no visibility into it. And at the exact same time, you know, you're starting to see all these lawsuits where the sell side is getting sued successfully because their interests are not aligned with the people whose actual money it is. You know, it's like people like you and me who are just, you know, have our retirement money wherever. And by the time that money has gone through all the places it goes to the person on the sell side, there's really a lot of corruption. And so there's a lot of, by managing currency exposure more efficiently, and if you add some more sophisticated tools, what you're able to do is really keep a lot of that flow away from the sell side. And the other piece of it that I think a lot of asset managers, buy-side people don't really think about or know is that the liquidity platforms that you're placing your currency executions over, their clients are the sell side. So they are being paid by the sell side, and they are set up to service the sell side. So the way that, the way that they recommend an implementation, for example, is provides a lot more information to the sell side than the sell side really needs to give the execution. And I just think that there's a little bit of this education gap where the buy side just kind of thinks of currency as sort of operational, a little bit of a sort of a risk rather than thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm actually exposing my client's money to an asset class that I really don't have any business, having exposure to. So I really should be hedging it. And then those people who are hedging it, well, wait a minute, I have a fiduciary responsibility to see that I'm getting a decent execution and that this is being managed well. And I think there's a big gap in people thinking that way.
Do you think that the buy side, now that there have been a number of lawsuits, they're going to think more about their fiduciary responsibility to the end investor?
I definitely like to think so, and that is part of, just yesterday there was an article that the head of FX at HSBC. So, and this is not the first time that HSBC has, gotten into some serious hot water over this exact issue. And this guy, the head of the FX trading desk at HSBC, was indicted for front-running his client's money. And he was caught on an internal communication where he said, and I quote, I won't actually quote because it's a dirty word, but he says, that order was like effing Christmas. So that really showcases the level of corruption and just how they do not have incentive to be protecting the interests of the buy-side clients.
Yeah, that sounds
it's pretty egregious, right? And there definitely is chatter, and there's more and more, and I like to think I'm contributing to that chatter. And I like to think that we offer, at least help in sort of bringing it back and forcing them to make some adjustments.
Well, outside of that, too, it sounds like there are additional issues in terms of crossing the spread that you talk about a bit in your book. As an asset manager, why should I specifically care about crossing the spread, and what is, the alternative?
Sure. Well, I mean, just for anybody who doesn't, just to sort of exactly clarify what I mean by the spread, is anybody who's traveled outside the country knows that what you buy currency for is more than what you sell currency for, right? So when the more often you're doing the buying and selling, the more money you're spending, right? That's what I mean by crossing the spread. And there's
right.
Sorry, go ahead.
I said, hence the creation of the euro when Europeans just got overly frustrated.
There you go. That's exactly right. So, because they were crossing the spread way too much for their liking. So, so if you think about a firm, particularly like a large asset management firm or even a medium-sized one that has, or any kind of company, they have exposure to currencies in all kinds of different parts of their business. So I do think that most of the focus on the currency exposure management tends to fall on the portfolios, and that's appropriate, but there's a lot of other risks. Like you might have an office in London and you need to make payroll. So there's really thinking about, or you might have a supply chain, or there's all kinds of different, however you do your business, and especially more and more and more as this world, we just become more and more global. It's like, pretty much anyone in doing business in anything has some kind of currency exposure. So the problem is just kind of getting bigger, but by centralizing it. So in other words, saying, okay, well, I have a portfolio return and in pounds, but I'm a portfolio based in dollars. So I need to sell those pounds, right? So I'm going to sell those pounds. I'm going to go to the sell side and find a market and settle that trade. Meanwhile, you've got perhaps the corporate finance group saying, oh, we need to make payroll in London, so I have to take these dollars and buy some pounds so I can pay my people in London. So meanwhile, there was no reason. You've just crossed the spread twice when you didn't need to cross it at all. And depending on the currency pair, sometimes that gets really expensive, and when we look at the way we model out some use cases of just like a day of trading using netting, where you're kind of centralizing and putting those efficiencies in place versus just, crossing the spread every single time, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars a day at a large firm. It's very real money.
Why don't asset managers, why don't they have a better sense for how much it's costing them? I feel like traders tend to know that there's a spread on every trade that they make, but how is that not taken into account in their fund profitability, or is it?
Yeah, no, I think it kind of comes back to the original thing I was saying, is that they don't have visibility to that execution. It's really, they kind of think of it, and I think a lot of businesses do this, they just think of it as operational. So that goes for, a retail store. It's like, all right, I have a store in Japan and it's making money and I'm just getting paid. I'm sort of just absorbing that currency risk, not really knowing that I can kind of do something about it. I think a lot of people say, oh, it shakes out over time. But if, when you're funding an income stream, shaking out over time is not okay. So I think there's people have bought into this idea that it's okay, it's just part of the risk. Sometimes it works for you, sometimes it works against you. But it goes back to my original thought, which is to say, hey, but you don't know if it's going to go for your client or against your client. So you may as well be taking it to Vegas and betting it on black. And it does have a real impact on the returns. But I really just think, it's an education thing. Again, it's not, another reason, Shireen, is it's like I said, it is an especially difficult asset class to master. And not very many people are really gravitate towards it. I mean, it's not a big revenue generator, right? So it's not like some of these other really highly structured, difficult asset classes that you master some credit default swaps, and there's a lot of money to be made from that. There's not a ton of money. There's a lot of money to be saved. It's just it looks very different, and I just think there's a gap in the understanding of that. And I've been a little bit surprised, quite honestly, because when I sort of originally set out on this whole endeavor, what I figured was that it would be the smaller asset managers who really wouldn't have a currency person for sure. But I've been really surprised to see that even the largest ones really don't have this together. Even if they understand maybe they have a little bit of a way they could be saving, it just doesn't get prioritized.
Yeah, I think that's right. It sounds like it's not being sort of surfaced, mostly because it's not a profit drive, it's not a revenue driver, it's a cost saver or a risk reduction investment. So are there any other approaches besides netting that you discuss in Hedging Wisely? I don't want to give away the entire book on our webinar today, but talk to us about one or two of the approaches that you talk about in the book on how asset managers can better serve their customers' needs.
I mean, there's really the two big things are, first of all, the centralizing and having those efficiencies, and then also the netting. And you can, there's kind of different ways you can net. And if you think of every currency transaction as a buy and a sell, you can think about getting pretty sophisticated with that netting. So rather than just thinking, okay, well, if I have account A needs to buy €100 dollar and account B needs to sell €60 dollar, I obviously have a net buy of 40 that I take to the sell side. So right there, I have absolutely serviced my client by being able to fill the 60 at the mid of the spread. But you can take that a step further and actually start breaking these currency pairs apart. So if you think, if I'm buying, account A is buying €100 and it's selling 105 or whatever it is today, dollars, right? So then if I have account B, is buying $105 and selling yen, however much that works out to, those dollar legs offset each other. And so you can think about how you start to build a chain and you start to build a path to offset as much as you can. And in the end, you are able to take much, much less to the sell side, depending on, what that basket of currency pairs you're working with is. But you can very often, you can eliminate a lot more traffic than just that simple netting. And then kind of the big game, sorry, just one more thought, kind of the big game over, is a buy side to buy side starting to have buy side to buy side liquidity, where you're just cutting the sell side out altogether.
How do you think the sell side will react to that, or what do you think is going to be the implications, given there are lawsuits on the one hand, and I would imagine, even though there are lawsuits, it's still a pretty lucrative business for the sell side. Or do you think?
Yeah, I like to think that. Sorry.
Oh, I was just asking if you think there's going to be a regulatory impact, or what do you think the implications are of all of these lawsuits and what that's going to mean for the sell side?
Right. So I do like to think that, the first step of making any of this better is certainly drawing attention to it. And I think about how we talk a lot, our politicians talk a lot about how, the big banks are broken and there's all this corruption and, and the fat cats on Wall Street. And I've always really found that a very distasteful message, because the approaches are always about breaking things apart and, putting more oversight and more regulatory. And I think that really just impacts the investor even more negatively, because they're the ones who bear the impact of all that overhead, the expense of that overhead. So I wonder if kind of all of this cumulatively, it starts to gain a little traction, and it kind of forces them to pick up their act, and be better actors in the market. And without having, so that's a real market solution to a problem rather than a regulatory solution to a problem. That's what I would love to see. There absolutely is a place in the sell side for this market. We need them, right? Like, it's not like they absolutely serve a really important purpose, and they deserve to be compensated for that. But if you make it, when a market ends up structured where it so heavily favors them over the buy side, and the buy side represents like your average human being, it feels like a situation that really needs to change.
Do you think asset managers will ever sell funds based on how well currency hedging is done for the fund? Is that something they tend to do now, or you'd like to see them do more of?
Well, that's part of this education effort also is investors should know to ask for it. It's kind of like the analogy I use in my book is about an airbag. It's like you were driving around without a seatbelt for a long time and you felt perfectly fine about it. When someone showed you an airbag, you didn't expect to have to ask for it. So it's kind of like, as professionals, we need to be telling them, hey, we could be hedging your currency risk. Would you want that risk? Do you want that hedge? So trying to make them a little bit more savvy about as a requirement. So making it a demand-driven requirement, and then asset managers, they really don't have a choice but to respond to that. Right now, it becomes an attribute in their product. It becomes a selling point. It becomes a differentiator.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be a great thing to have happen, to make customers more aware of that underlying issue. And then because they know about it, then the asset managers will also raise it up in their priority lists. So, I know you care deeply about the space, and you care so much about it that you actually founded a company. And can you tell us a little bit more about the Wise Risk technology and why you founded Wise Trading Technologies?
Yeah, of course. So, exactly. I was, at very large institutions and was kind of like, wow, I just, was on a project that was multi-million, multi-year that to kind of automate the nuts and bolts of some of this currency hedging stuff. And what are the little guys doing? And so I actually, when we had sort of at one of these asset managers, we had conducted a pretty significant, pretty heavy due diligence on a build versus buy before building all this out, and there was nothing there. And so I was just kind of started, thinking about it, like what's a smaller asset manager doing? What are asset managers who maybe their mandate, not every asset manager's mandate is to make as much money as possible, right? Like a lot of asset managers have a mandate of it's social responsibility, or it's women-led, or it's LGBT, or it's something. There are these socially or personal-driven investment strategies, and can't they get better tools? And I thought, if you could provide something low cost, just to sort of, it's just, tiny, level the playing field just the tiniest little bit, then, there's this, like this is how the big boys do it. This is what these $1 trillion under management places have, but you shouldn't have to be that to have the good technology. So that was kind of what, it was just like, well, I mean, and I thought it was a great business model. Like, wow, there's surely a lot of people who would pay, 6 figures a year to have this kind of protection for their clients. And they're probably not going to be the big asset managers. And again, I've been really surprised to see our first 2 clients are very large asset managers, and they did not have this solved. But there is kind of this issue of like a lot of these places, particularly probably these smaller ones who are, again, with some sort of social mandate or something, they really are not going to know they have a problem. They're not going to have that in-house, that expertise, or even, or they might know they have a problem. They're not going to realize that there's actually a really low cost and easy way to solve that problem. Mm-hmm. And so that's the product. I mean, not surprisingly, it automates everything I just talked about, kind of taking in, monitoring all firm activity that has any currency implications, and putting it all together, centralizing it, and addressing it as a big tool of exposure. That's kind of the first step. The netting that I described, that cross-currency netting, where you're breaking currencies apart, we are currently applying for a patent for that. We've built an advanced netting algorithm to do that, and then just some other help around some broker recommendation, and that's kind of the product. And it's kind of like your currency systems and operations in a box, shrink wrapped, like plug and play, and go on and start working on the things you're really good at and that you care about, and let this just be solved for you.
That makes so much sense. So do you guys take a piece of each trade? How do you plan to charge for this? Because, how do you keep it from turning into, where you have the same incentives as the sell side?
Right. No, that's great. And it's a subscription based, and that is actually another sort of little barrier to entry has been this going back to what I started at the beginning, is that the buy side has kind of been snowed a lot of times into thinking that they're getting this software for free, because they're getting some functionality from these liquidity platforms that, again, I say are their clients are the sell side, right? They're getting paid by the sell side, and the buy side does not have transparency and all those things that I've been talking about. So it actually was like, well, why would we, there's definitely people I talk to that they're like, why would we buy software from you when we get this for free? I'm like, because you don't get it for free, and that's part of it also. But so for us, we want to be a low cost, just a subscription and an item on a budget that really is just not even noticed, and it's just kind of like a Bloomberg. It's like, all right, it's just a cost of doing business. We have to have this hedge. We have to manage this risk. We have to have data to do our jobs. We have to have this risk managed to provide this value to our clients. So thinking of it that way, definitely not thinking of it as having any part of the execution space. Just empowering people to use that existing execution space to their optimal level.
Okay. Rohanna, there's actually a question from a caller, and I want to, or from an attendee on the conference, and I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to encourage all the other attendees to look at your GoToWebinar panel. You'll see a place where you can ask a question, and feel free to send them along, and I'll try to fit in as many as we can in the next couple of minutes. So, question from caller Bill is, how do I find how do I find out more about the lawsuits that have happened on the sell side? And maybe I can answer this as go to Google. But how what's a good place to go to really understand the impact of the sell side lawsuits?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't really have a great answer because I really do just kind of rely on the media coverage of it from all kinds of different sources. I think I wish I understood a little more about why that question's being asked. Is it a concern that it's not, that it's a tilt in the media or something? But
Yeah.
I've never heard anyone question. A lawsuit is a successful lawsuit is pretty good evidence that something pretty bad happened, in my opinion. Indictments, it's so, and obviously they're all public. So if someone was really interested, I'm sure you could dig into public documents. I hope that answered it. And if it didn't, Bill, I would love for you to just shoot me an email and we can discuss that further if that didn't answer your question.
Okay. And the next question actually comes from our friend Jay. As an asset manager, you talked about strategies around crossing the spread. Where can I find, training? Should I read, is your book the place to start, or is the book the place to finish? That's my
Great question. The book is the place to start. It is definitely intended to be a 101. It is not a textbook. It is a 100-page kind of, it's meant to be very readable. It has, it's a pretty dry topic. It's not easy to make it totally readable, but I did my very best. And, it has characters who have situations, and it's definitely intended to be very readable for someone with a pretty basic understanding of finance.
Thank you. And thanks to Bill and to Jay for asking us good questions. And with that, I am going to move on and let our attendees wrap up a bit. I just wanted to call attention to our sponsor today, Wise Trading Technologies, which has built cost-effective technology enabling customers, asset manager customers, to participate in the global markets while keeping their focus on their core value proposition without hiring currency experts or compromising the quality of their currency exposure management. And I want to thank you very much, Rohanna, for all of the great information that you shared with us today. Thanks so much. And
thank you.
I want to and I want to invite anybody who's viewing this webinar, whether in real time or later, to send an email to the address that you see on your screen, and encourage you to follow us. We always try to keep our content fresh at wise_risk on Twitter. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.